Our final main bucket when we think of our study skills is the management of information or language. So a lot falls in this one. um, Most things we do in school are trying to help students manage the information and language of our classrooms. So these are students, who might struggle with taking organized notes or categorizing information appropriately, distinguishing between that topic, main idea, and details, paraphrasing and summarizing information, studying effectively for a test. That falls into how do we manage our information. Writing an essay, a huge one, the writing process. How do we manage that information? I'm not gonna be able to tackle everything in the management of information bucket. Um, so I'm gonna focus on how we build in routines for directions, which is obviously a language heavy space, the way we give directions. So I think it's helpful if we can consider trying, say, on a digital workspace, making our directions shorter. So, like trying to avoid long paragraphs, especially as we are, having students practice the art of breaking down directions. I think it's best if we can break them down into bullets for them so they're really manageable and palatable. Make it clear what the actual task is. Don't have it be buried somewhere in the paragraphs. Provide models that show, what the final product could look like. And then if possible, embed links with helpful resources throughout. So I have a sample here um, that, excuse me, it's taking a real life prompt from a ninth grade civics course and breaks it down. So it's thinking about the assignment. There are clear bullets, kind of outlining the steps of what they need to do for this task. It has clear requirements that pulls out the essential info, like the fact that it needs to be 2 to 3 pages and there should be a thesis statement. And maybe that's where you throw in how many quotes are required. Um, and then I also like that this links to potential resources you could use and then information about how to submit. And that's where you'll have really clearly outlined and bold maybe what the due date is. And then in this example, there's a hyperlinked rubric so that you're also embedding the assignment rubric for the student so that they can look over that rubric. I will say as a pro tip, it's ideal if we can, as the teachers, project the rubric and look it over, excuse me, with our students and be able to say, here are the grading components of this assignment. Again, projecting to college, that's one of the things I really try to work with students on. Can you find the assignment rubric? Do you know what it is or where it exists? And a lot of times they need a lot of support figuring out where that is and making sure they understand what the teacher is actually asking them to do and what they will be grading them on. So I think it's really great if we can practice that with our developing learners. So I'm soon going to be shifting gears into the personal learning awareness bucket. But before we do, I wanted a quick note about how we can sort of try to support time, materials, and information all at once. So how do we support all three of those buckets? So one instructional strategy we try to, talk about and use at Landmark is to conclude instruction for about 3 to 5 minutes before the end of class so that we can prompt students to write their homework down. Maybe that could be your exit ticket, for example. Tell them where paper should go and make sure they don't just stuff it in their bag, but save that time to, okay, everyone, let's put this in our notes section. Let's take out our planner and I want to write down the homework and I want you to let me know if you have any questions about it. It's a nice moment to save you time at the end and emails at the end of the day because students might have to figure out and make sense of what the homework it is a little bit while they're there in the room with you. This could also be for the information piece where you tie in maybe an exit ticket strategy to have them write down one takeaway from class so that they're processing that information and helping, their memory as they before they move into the next class and prompting them to then be able to use that the next day as a spiral back technique. Um, so I think it really supports our students with these study skills if we're not letting them rush out and we're not shouting at them the homework, which I've been guilty of, but instead we're saying, okay, we still have a few minutes left in class. Let's get organized before we shift gears. So we can also help with that flexibility piece, managing those transitions, which we, you know, I've talked about are a challenging part of the life of a student who's still developing their executive function skills. Um, So that's a little pause to try to build in time for those first three buckets. So woven throughout our instruction of materials, time, and information is also the need to help students develop their own personal learning awareness or metacognition. So I think that's kind of like embedded really throughout all of the strategies we might use. But a student who, really might need this is someone who might struggle with reflecting on themselves as learners, seeing the importance of process steps versus just the product, understanding the strategies that work for them specifically, shifting strategies if it's not working, and then self-monitoring as they go through tasks. These are all things that students need to be able to develop as learners moving through their high school, their educational experience. So I'm going to focus on building in time for reflection, because I just more and more am reading about how important it is to build in the time to have students reflect on their behaviors, their decisions, how they did, good or bad on an assignment, all of that. So I think as teachers, it's really helpful if we can explicitly prompt and build in time for that reflection and goal setting that often go hand in hand. Um, and one way that I'll talk about, I think, a little bit is that reviewing teacher feedback with students. But before that, I think um, it's one clear way to do this is through test analysis, which I guess is teacher feedback. In my mind, I was thinking of a different kind. But yeah, after a student has completed a test, has been graded on that test and gotten feedback, you can do a test analysis with them, which we've been doing at Landmark for decades, really. What I love about a really effective test analysis is that it asks students to figure out how they lost points, and not just like, oh, you lost X points, but how did you lose your points? So for example, on this list, it talks about like, if you did not know the answer, but it was in your notes, that means you need to revisit your studying strategies because you had the information in your notes, you just need to study it more effectively. But if you didn't know the answer and it was not in your notes, then that's saying you need to maybe work on note taking in class. Um, so it really helps narrow in on what behavior might shift or what they might do differently next time, because then you can prompt them for the studying goal that specifically they want to make for this. Um, Another example of a way to build in reflection questions. This is just one example to show different ways you can break it into categories in this particular example. So it helps students reflect on, you could have, and you wouldn't necessarily have to do all at once. You could do some, one particular day you want them to reflect on their independent work time in class or on their homework that quarter or on the use of and how they interact with the rubrics in your class, on their overall time management skills. So I think you can kind of pick and choose when to have them reflect on some of these, or you could take, at the end of a big project, you could take, some series of these questions and have them sort of reflect on across categories as they think about how did they do on this project with regard to all of these skills. Um, and so I think if you think back to the developing brain, children and adolescents need to practice the skill of reflecting on their experiences and evaluating how they might change it up next time. And I would just say again, the work I do with college students, I see how unpracticed many of them are in this. And I think it's uncomfortable. Reflection can be uncomfortable because you have to think through maybe where you lost points on something or something that you didn't feel as great about, and trying to help our young learners practice that and show them it's okay. We all lose points sometimes, and we all do things that maybe we would have wanted to do differently next time. And it's really important to think through them so that we can feel better about it next time. And then the last piece, when thinking about personal learning awareness, this particular um, worksheet comes from a Landmark colleague and was adapted from Sarah Ward's Get Ready, Do Done, which is a great strategy to use, especially with younger learners. So I recommend checking it out. But this particular form we call Plan, Do, Assess. And what I love about this is that it helps cue students before, during, and after an independent task. And prompts them to sort of reflect a little if you're getting the theme. So before getting started, you prompt them to set a goal and to make a plan during that time. Halfway through, you pause and you ask them to reflect on how they're doing and if they're meeting that goal and if they need to change anything up. And then at the end, you again ask them to assess how did that go? Help them think through anything they might do differently next time. So it helps students practice a variety of skills. It helps them deal with short-term goal setting. This is ideal, say, in a class where you're giving them an independent work period, maybe for 40 minutes. This would be really helpful and effective in that kind of time frame. It helps them practice planning and prioritizing because they have to figure out what they want to prioritize in that time. They have to pause and reflect. They have to be flexible and shift gears if what they're doing isn't quite working. And then they have to think what they might do differently for next time, which helps that kind of future thinking and goal setting as well.